In this moment of our history, I think we're being confronted with questions that we don't usually have to ask. Questions like, what is and isn't essential to life? Questions like, how much control do we actually have over life? How do we live when we're confronted daily with a sense of our own fragility and mortality? We usually don't ask these types of questions because, honestly, I think we're probably just usually too busy to ask these kind of questions. We're busy working hard, or we're busy hardly working. We're busy going from party to party. We're busy driving our kids to, a million different kinds of extracurricular activities. We're busy seeing family. Let's be honest, we're probably busy just watching a lot of TV. Right? Life can keep us very busy, but I think right now in this moment, the pause button has been hit. The pause button's been hit on us. We have a freeze frame on life. And what is it that we're seeing? What is it that we're seeing? I've been thinking a lot about the movie Matrix recently. I'm sure we're all watching a lot of movies, and would love to hear from you what your favorite movies are. Matrix is definitely one of mine. And not just because of the cool action scenes, but because of some of the really kind of profound questions that it asks. There's that scene, right, where Morpheus, who is the leader of those who have been, kind of unplugged from the machine, he's talking to Neo, and he offers him an option. You can take a blue pill and stay plugged into the machine, stay living your fake life, or you can take a red pill and be waked up to the harsh reality of life, but see things as they really are. I think COVID-19 has kind of force-fed all of us a red pill. And we have been woken up to the harsh realities of life. And we're beginning to ask questions that we've never maybe asked before. What gives you meaning in life? In this freeze frame moment that we're living in, as you are maybe thinking about life in a way you've never thought about before, when all is said and done, what is it that you'll have actually accomplished in your life? What is your reason for being? The book of Ecclesiastes, which is about this man called the preacher that we met in verse 1, this preacher is observing life, and he's thinking about life, and he's asking these kinds of questions. Really, the whole theme of Ecclesiastes is this: is there more to life than this? Is there more life than this? Is there more than life than just going through the grind? What is life actually about? Is there more to life than this? The Bible is a very honest book. It's not scared to look at the hard questions, the big questions of life. And the book of Ecclesiastes really takes us on a journey to the discovery of these questions. And this morning we're going to follow the preacher on this journey of discovery as we look through chapters 1 and 2. I'm going to tell this morning's sermon, The Search for Meaning. The search for meaning. And really there's just two things that this book tells us this morning in these two chapters. First, it's going to tell us that really there is no point to life. There is no point to life. And I know that sounds bleak, but stick with me. It's going to take us somewhere really important. Because really, once we see what life is about, we see there's really only two options for living. There's really two options for living. And I just want to kind of warn you up front, this is not a soundbite message. This is not a message where, hey, you can just, listen to every other word and get a few good quotes and, maybe tweet them out. No, this is going to take some work. This is going to take some rolling up our sleeves and some thinking. But man, if there was ever a time where we needed to think, I think that time is right now. And so let's look at this together, as this, I think, is going to bring us to some really life-changing, life-shaping truth. Let's look at the first thing here, where he kind of draws out for us that there's no point to life. The author of Ecclesiastes starts by quoting this guy, the preacher, and almost the whole book is this preacher talking. And the first thing that the preacher says to us comes in verse 2, when he says, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." Now, by vanity, he doesn't mean that, things, he's not talking about pride or conceit. No, the Hebrew word here for vanity is the word hebel. And actually, I want you to go ahead and try to say that word. Try to say the word hebel. And when you do, pay attention to what you feel on your mouth. So say the word hebel. Did you feel it? If you're saying it right, you should feel a quick burst of breath on both your lips. And that's actually what the word means. It means a quick breath. It means a brief vapor. And so what the preacher is saying here is that life is like that. It's vanity in the sense that it's just a quick breath. It's just a fleeting vapor. You know, kids, think about when you go outside and the weather's cold, right? You can see your breath when you breathe. And when you see it, it's there for a minute, and it just kind of dissipates, just kind of goes away. And when you breathe out like that, like it looks like something's there. It looks like there's, if you were to touch it, like you could grab it and there's something solid. But when you go to grab for it, there's actually nothing there. It's just a quick, fleeting breath. That's Habil. And that's what this preacher is saying that life is like. We want to think there's substance to it. We want to think that life means something. But the more that we experience life, the more we realize there's not much to it, and it's just here one day and gone the next. He says in verse 4, a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Right? See, we say, hey, we just kind of go round and round. We are born, and then we die. Hopefully, there's other people who are born, but then they're just going to die. He's saying it's just a cycle. Life is a cycle. The earth remains unchanged, but we just kind of cycle through it. And then he goes on to say, hey, this is what we see really just throughout all of nature. Right? The sun rises and the sun sets. Verse 5 just keeps going round and around. Verse 6, the wind blows one way and then it blows up the next way. Verse 7, the water runs out to the sea, but the sea's never filled, and it just runs back into the streams. Right? He's saying there's just this cycle. Things just keep going and going, but nothing is really happening or being accomplished. There's movement, but there's no progress. In many ways, he didn't know about treadmills, but I think he's saying that life is like a treadmill. Right? There's energy being expended, there's movement happening, but nothing's actually going anywhere. And so he closes us out in verse 9 by saying, what has been will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there's nothing new under the sun. Life is cyclical. It's just one big circle, unending. And he's saying, so what is the point of any of this? Right now, our lives have been disrupted in a dramatic way by this pandemic. But here's the reality that all the scientists are telling us right now. It was only a matter of time. It was only a matter of time. This is not the first pandemic, nor will this be the last. Our economy right now is being pressed in a way that it hasn't been since the Great Depression. But there was a Great Depression. Like our economy has gone through really hard times before. World War I was called the war to end all wars. Until a few decades later, there was World War II. And then really, has there ever been a time without some kind of global conflict taking place? Ecclesiastes is pointing out to us what any study of history or science will show us, and it's this, that life is repetitive. History is repetitive. Nature is repetitive. It's just cyclical. And so really, as we look at the cycle, it's what's the point of all this? I mean, if we're just going to kind of be born, and then we're going to live, and then eventually we're going to die, and that's just it on repeat, what's the point of even being alive in the first place? That's what this author is asking, and then that's really the answer that he finds an answer. He says in verse 8, all things are full of weariness. Hey, if we think about things, anything, if we think about it long enough, we'll see that, man, this cycle, it just makes it pointless. It's just a weariness. And he says in verse 8, a man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear with hearing. He's saying, right, we don't want to speak about it. We don't want to utter it. We don't want to see this truth. We don't want to look at it. And we certainly don't want to hear about this. But that does not change the fact that it's true. And if you read any of the great thinkers from history, whether it be Plato, Aristotle, Nietzsche, or Sartre, or Bertrand Russell to Albert Camus, like everyone has tried to grapple with this in one way or another. In 1879, Leo Tolstoy, the great author and thinker, he wrote his memoir, and in it he speaks of this kind of midlife crisis that he has. And it didn't come because he was going through anything bad. No, he actually had achieved a lot in life. He had a lot of fame. He had a lot of influence. He was kind of, in that time, an A-list celebrity, if you will. But as you start thinking about life, you start thinking about how, man, just a generation comes and a generation goes and things remain the same. It's just an unending cycle. This is what he says, and it's a little bit of a long quote. It's Tolstoy. What else would you expect? But he said, what will come of what I'm doing today or tomorrow? What will come of my whole life? Why should I live? Why wish for anything or do anything? Without such answers, one cannot live life, but I have no answers. Is there any meaning in my life that the inevitable death awaiting me does not destroy? My deeds, whatever they may be, will be forgotten sooner or later, and I myself will be no more. Why then do anything? I could not attach a rational meaning to a single act of my entire life. The only thing that amazed me was how I failed to realize this from the beginning. It's possible to live only as long as life intoxicates us. But once we are sober, we cannot help seeing it's all a delusion. Do you see what he's saying? He's saying, man, I'm going to be forgotten. Like, he's written all these great works, he's done all this stuff, but no mark I make on this life is actually going to last. And so what's my life been about anyways? And he's amazed that he hadn't thought of this before. He says the only reason he hasn't thought about this before is because he's been so intoxicated on life. Like, he was drunk on his success. He was drunk with just the fast-paced nature of everything. But once he started to think about things, once he got sobered up, once he took the red pill, he could not find much meaning in anything he was doing. It makes me think of the line from Shakespeare's famous play, Macbeth, right, where he talks about life, and he says, life is full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing. Like, well, those are just, philosophers and they're artists, and they're always tortured souls, perhaps, but try to argue with their logic. What is the point of life that's just going to end in death, and that's just going to keep repeating itself for generations afterwards? And one generation eventually will not remember the former. What's the point of life when it's just seeming to be going nowhere? If we look to life itself, there seems to be no point in life. But this kind of brings us to, okay, how do we deal with this? Well, really, I think there's really one of only two options. There's really two options. And the first is that if there is no point to life, then we have to create our own meaning in life. And this is what the preacher does. He tries to create his own meaning. He says in verse 13, I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under the sun. He's like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to try to figure this out. I'm going to try to take my life and create a meaning in it. There's no inherent meaning in what I'm seeing, so I'm going to try to bring meaning to it. Life seems to be meaningless, so I'm not going to try to discover meaning. I'm just going to try to make up my own story. Richard Dawkins, in his book, The God Delusion, after he kind of deconstructs God and deconstructs that there is really any inherent meaning in life, he says that this is what we should do. Since there's no point to life, that means that you get to decide what you live for, right? If there's no point to life, then we create our own meaning. That's an option. And that's where this author of Ecclesiastes starts. And he starts by trying to create this meaning. He does it in three different ways. Here's the first thing he does. He starts by trying to know wisdom. Verses 17, 18 of chapter 1, he says, I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. But I perceived that this also is but striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. And so his first pursuit is to go get himself some education. Right? He wants to get smart. He wants to get educated as he possibly can. But then he says that is futile. It's as pointless as trying to run and catch the wind. It's striving after the wind. Because it ends up just resulting in more vexation, more angst, more inner toil. It only added to his sorrows, he says. Well, why is that? Why is that? Well, he gives two reasons why that is. In chapter 2, verse 15, he says, "What happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise?" Here's what he's saying. He tried to find meaning in being educated, but he's like, hey, it doesn't matter how educated I get, I still experience life the same way. Like, you can have certificates from every prestigious institution in the world, but that doesn't stop the pain that you feel when a loved one is lost. Like, it doesn't matter how wise you are, the same thing is going to happen to you whether you have 5 PhDs or whether you dropped out of school in middle school. And so his conclusion is here, then why have I spent so much effort being wise? And here's the second challenge he finds in just pursuing wisdom. He says in verse 12, "I turn to consider wisdom and madness and folly, but what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what's already been done." As we heard in the reading that we had, that in verse 1, this preacher he's the son of the king. And so his points here is like, hey, how am I going to be able to do anything that my father hasn't done? His conclusion is I'm not. I'm just going to do what he did. And so even though this preacher is much wiser, he's way more educated than his father, he says, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, our lives are going to be essentially about the same kind of stuff. Wisdom does not really bring progress, is his conclusion, because life is just a cycle that keeps repeating itself no matter how much wisdom you get. And so think about it. I mean, we've developed incredible technology, right? Like, no one can imagine even 50 years ago what's taking place right now, right? Being seen through a screen live. We developed this incredible technology. But has technology really changed anything that's happening? I mean, in some ways, yes, but in other ways, no. When I got my first sales job, my boss said, hey, welcome to the ancient art of selling, right? And so in some ways, I was doing something that was new. I was selling new technology that had been just recently developed, and I was using technology to sell it. So I was able to get in a car. That's a piece of technology. I used my GPS to be able to find where I was going, a piece of technology. We used sales tracking software as a piece of technology. But if you think about it, I was doing the same thing that cavemen were doing when one had a piece of meat and another wanted it. Just selling stuff. Medicine has advanced, obviously, incredibly over human history. We can save lives now in ways we never could. And we're praying for a treatment and a vaccine for COVID-19 so that we can start, reopening life again. But here's what we have to understand. No matter what ends up being developed, the mortality rate, it's not going to change. The mortality rate of human life is still 100%, no matter what kind of medicine and technology comes out. And so this preacher, he concludes that, man, no amount of knowledge really changes things, and so he just can't find any meaning in it. And so he's like, all right, I'm going to stop thinking hard about my life. I'm just going to try to enjoy life. And so he moves from wisdom to the pursuit of pleasure. And he tries out a few different things. In verse 3 of chapter 2, he says, I search with my heart how to cheer my body with wine. He's like, hey, good glass of wine. I'm just going to enjoy that. Life's about that. He goes on in verses 4 and 5 to says, I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted them and all kinds of fruit trees. So he's got all these fruit trees. He's got his own vineyard. And he's got this huge, amazing house. NTV Cribs has nothing on this guy. Like, he's building these amazing things. He decides to get into the arts. And so in verse 8, he says that I got singers, both men and women. And so he's like hanging out with, making great music, being creative. He starts accumulating a ton of stuff. In verse 7, he says, I had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than anyone who come before me. He's got a lot of things. And all this is happening because he is just absolutely loaded. He says, I gathered for myself silver and gold, the treasure of kings and provinces. And so I became great and surpassed all who were before me. And so this guy he's like Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, mixed with B.B. King, who's my favorite musician, mixed with Brad Pitt, who, let's be honest, Brad Pitt is the, best looking man who's ever been created under the sun. Like this guy, he had it all. He says in verse 10, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep it from them. Like he had worked hard, he had accumulated it all, and he was playing hard, and he was enjoying it. But then he realized that all his pleasure still didn't change the fact that life was a treadmill. He says, I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and striving after wind. Just like wisdom, this pursuit of pleasure, he said, didn't actually gain anything because it didn't change anything. It didn't bring him what he was looking for. I mean, this guy had achieved the American dream. He had it all. But then he found out that the American dream is a lie. You know, he found out that it's just playing pretend to think that once you have something, you'll truly be satisfied. We play pretend all the time, don't we? We play pretend that if we get a promotion or have good children that we'll be fulfilled in life. We play pretend that if we could just change jobs or just change homes, then life will feel different than it is right now. We play pretend that if we just could start a new relationship, then we'll never feel lonely again. We play pretend that if we were able to get married or be married no longer, that we would be content. We play pretend that if we just had some more money, then we finally would be more joyful. You know, our culture is constantly telling us, hey, if you just had this, then you'd be happy. But we get the this, and we find out we're not happy. And so we just start looking for another this. It's just a cycle. There's a fascinating book by a man named Greg Easterbrook. The book is called The Progress Paradox. Why life gets better, but people feel worse. And in it, he uses various studies to show how, man, we can have almost anything we want nowadays except happiness. And the reason is because the more we get, the more we progress, the more we have, the more we realize that it doesn't bring the lasting happiness that we're looking for, and so the more we search for it again and again. It made me think about the famous interview that Tom Brady gave multiple years ago after winning his third Super Bowl. He got on 60 Minutes, and in live television, he says this in a very real human moment. He said, why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people will say, hey, man, this is what it is, you know, and I reached my goal, my dream, my life. But for me, I think it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. And then the interviewer asked, well, what's your answer to that? And Tom Brady's like, I wish I knew. I mean, he has it all. He has money, he has fame, he has success. He's got, a beautiful family. But he was experiencing what this author of Ecclesiastes experienced so many years ago, is that you can be at the top of life and still feel like you are not satisfied. And we all think like, oh no, well, if I had it, things would be different. Well, really? Really? You've gotten that job. You did graduate from school. You did get whatever it is that you thought, a couple years ago, oh, when I get this, like you now have it. Are you really still happy? We think that getting to this will satisfy us, but it doesn't. And so this Ecclesiastes, this author, he says, well, okay, it's not about wisdom, it's not about pleasure. He goes to one of the things. He says, what if meaning in life has nothing to do with me? It's not about me. It's not about trying to get more educated. It's not about trying to pursue pleasure. But what if it's about trying to leave a better tomorrow? What if it's not about me? What if it's about the next generation? What if it's about trying to leave some kind of legacy? But then he thinks more about that, and he thinks about his kids. And this is what he says in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 19. He says, who knows whether he'll be a wise or fool? Yet he'll be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. See what he's saying? He's saying, I can work, to make things better for my kid, but I can't really control that things will be better because they might just go and waste everything I've done. Like, I can't make a better tomorrow for my kid because they have to make it for themselves, and as much as I want to pretend that I control them and what they do, like, as much as I want to think that, hey, if I just set them up right, they'll go in the right direction, that's not true. There's no guarantee for that. And so he's like, I can't find meaning in them being successful because I can't guarantee their success. And so I think what Ecclesiastes is telling us, and what we know to be true, if we just give ourselves the space to think long enough, it's saying that, man, if we're just trying to go through life, trying to create our own meaning, that's not a freeing experience, as Richard Dawkins said it would be. No, it actually destroys any real enjoyment we can have in life. Like, it only works as long as, like Tolstoy says, we keep ourselves intoxicated. Like, you can't think soberly about life and live this way. There's always going to be a tension. There's always going to be a pulling. And I think we're all feeling this pulling very poignantly right now. But what if there was a different option? What if life was not about trying to create meaning? What if there was meaning that could be discovered? There's an important phrase that gets repeated 8 times in chapters 1 and 2. It's the phrase, under the sun. He says in verse 14 of chapter 1, I've seen everything that's done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. And then he goes on in that context to talk about pursuing wisdom. So it's pursuing wisdom under the sun. It's pursuing pleasure under the sun. It's toiling and trying to leave a legacy under the sun. And under the sun is simply a poetic way of saying life on earth. His point is that if this life is all that there is, then life is as pointless as trying to chase the wind. Like if this life is all there is, well, life is just a sinking ship. Like we're all going to die at some point. And so it makes no difference if you're on a sinking ship, if you go down hugging someone or mugging someone. Right? Like, if you're on the Titanic 5 minutes before it goes down and someone comes up to you and tries to mug you, it's like, yeah, here, take my wallet. You want my watch too? It's like you don't really care at that moment. Right? It doesn't matter. He's saying none of life matters if this life is all there is. If things are only under the sun, then there is no point to life. But what if there's something more than just this life? What if there's something more than just life under the sun? What if there's another option? This is where he goes in chapter 2, verses 24 and 25. He says, there's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. And here's how he does it. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? You see what he's saying? He's like, life can have meaning if we don't create it, but instead receive meaning from the hand of God. See, temporary things can have no lasting meaning in and of themselves because they're temporary. They're breath, they're fleeting, they're hebel. Temporary things cannot give us meaning, but they can be enjoyed when they point to something greater than itself, the one with eternal meaning, God. In other words, what he's saying is, hey, we can enjoy life as a gift if we see that there's a giver of the gift. The enjoyment of every gift always fades. I mean, who even remembers what they got from Christmas just a few months ago? And, I'm sure kids are starting to me right now. Oh, I remember they're trying to, get brownie points with their parents. Okay, try to remember 2 years ago, You don't remember that. All you know right now is what you want for Christmas, and it's 9 months away, If we're just trying to find meaning in the gifts of life, well, we'll never find it because these gifts just come and go. But if these gifts point to something greater beyond themselves, if they point to a giver of the gift, then we can enjoy this life because we know this life is not all that there is. And so we can actually pursue wisdom. That actually pursuit matters because while it does not change things, the more we learn, the more we can know the eternal God and worship him for who he is. Enjoying pleasure matters because even though the temporary moment of happiness will soon be over, we can still rejoice in the memory of it and thank God for what he gave us. Leaving a better tomorrow for our kids matters because while we can't control their tomorrow, things might get worse for them. We can find satisfaction in knowing that we pleased God by doing our best by them. See, it's not about the results of our kids, which are out of our control, but about pleasing God, which is something that's in our control. Right? This is what Ecclesiastes is telling us. It's saying if life is all there is, then there is no such thing as meaning in life. But if there's an eternal God, if there's another option, then we can enjoy this life. We can find tremendous meaning in it, in its good, in its bad, in its ugly, in the unending cycle. We can still find meaning in it because life is not ultimately about life. Our story doesn't end here. Life is about the eternal God and enjoying Him forever. And the reason that we know this is true, friends, that we know there's an eternal God, that we know that there can be meaning found in knowing that this life is not all there is, but stretches for eternity to the worship of the true God. The reason we can know that is because the Christian message is that eternity has touched earth. Jesus has come and has proven that there is a God by what we just celebrated last week, Easter. Right? He rose to new life to prove that He is God. God is as real as Jesus' tomb is empty. And this God is not just the eternal God. No, He's the eternal God of love. Because Jesus came to die on the cross for our sins. Like God gave us life to live for Him, but we instead choose to live our own way. Not necessarily doing bad things, just life on my terms instead of God's terms. And so God's justice says, well, He needs to then take back the life that He gave to be lived for Himself. That's why the Bible says the wages of sin, what living life our own way always earns, it's always death. But then God shows that He's the God of love by coming and dying the death that we deserve, like taking it upon Himself. And so Jesus is the proof that there's both an eternal God and that this God is the God of love. And so because of that, we can find tremendous meaning in living the life that He gives. And so friends, if you're watching this, and you're watching this because you're a spiritual searcher, I hope this gives you food for thought as you just consider about what God means for you and who He is in Jesus. We would love to connect with you more. There's information in the comments below in the description about how you can connect with us. I'd love to talk with you more. I think there's more to life than what you've been living so far. Is there more to life than this? The answer is yes, there's an eternal God. And knowing Him is how you can experience life in a deeper and more fuller and truer way than you ever have before. And if you're a Christian, I hope this encourages you to continue to find your life in Christ. Let's not play pretend. Let's not play pretend and think that there's anything here on earth that's ultimately going to satisfy us. No, may the cycle of life, its goods, its bads, its uglies, its sads, may all of life point us to something beyond itself. May it point us to the eternal God. You know, in these uncertain times, we can remain unshakable when we realize our purpose is unchanging because God is eternal. Like our life changes, but God never does. And so if our purpose in life is not to just go through life, if our purpose in life is to live in a way that praises and honors and obeys and shows the great worth of the unchanging God, then no matter what moment of uncertainty we find ourselves in, our purpose remains unshakable. Because we are living for the eternal God. May we be people who see how Christ is the only way to make sense of this crazy world. There's only two options to live. You can try to create your own meaning, and when you do, you'll find it's just breath. There's nothing there. Or you can have true meaning by believing in the eternal God who gave His life to show that He loves us. We can find life when we find it in Jesus Christ. I hope that we all more and more learn to find our life in Him. Let's pray.